What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel. Tonight, I am joined with Daniel Starkand, and it's on the heels of a rough night for the Dodgers, a 5-4 loss to the Padres tonight. And we'll dive into that game here in a little bit. But more so, this show is sort of a checkpoint for the Dodgers season. We're 12 days into the season. The Dodgers are 7-4. And normally, you don't make loud proclamations 11 games into a season, but we're officially less than 50 games left in the season. We got 49. And so this is what we've got to deal with. And so we'll start in a moment with our three biggest observations or storylines from the Dodgers. We'll do a roundup of the National League West just to give some context. There's some interesting storylines, I think, around the division. We'll get some thoughts on tonight's game, and then we'll end with some rapid-fire storylines from around the league, including thoughts on Joe Kelly's suspension. Neither of us have gotten a chance to voice our opinion on what's going on there. But let's start with the headline. The Dodgers are 7-4. They're tied for second place in the National League West. And in your mind, Daniel, the biggest storyline of the season so far is?
I'll start with the bullpen. That was one of the standouts to me so far this year. You know, the offense has been a little inconsistent. They've had their good days. They've had their bad days. Starting pitching, we haven't quite seen what that group's capable of yet. Guys are kind of still building up and still in spring training mode through their first couple starts. So really, you know, the unit that's carried this team is the bullpen. And coming into this season, that was arguably their biggest question mark. So it's been a pleasant sight to see. Going into tonight, which is Monday night's game, they had a 0.99 ERA and 0.9 WHIP, which is unheard of. That's in like a 46-inning sample size, so not tiny, but also, I mean, really small. We're still only 11 games in. But I think just the quality of arms we've seen back there has been really impressive. You know, obviously you got Kenley. We know he's closing out games. He's looked pretty good so far. He hasn't given up a run yet. But just the guys behind him, when you're talking about Treinen, Gratterall, Joe Kelly, Pedro Baez, Caleb Ferguson has looked great. Even like Dylan Floro and Scott Alexander have both looked really good so far. So just not only the amount of depth, but also the amount of high-end arms they have down there, I think bodes really well for the postseason.
Yeah, and I mean, I will add, I think there's a slight asterisk because there was that big inning they gave up against the Diamondbacks that all got logged as unearned runs because of a ball that Turner probably should have had. I mean, and that stuff evens itself out, so it's not that big of a deal. But another guy, Dennis Santana, had a big game for the Dodgers out of the bullpen. Yeah. But to me, it just feels like when you get to the postseason, you see teams just sort of ratchet up, and it just feels like when a guy's throwing 100, it looks different. It feels different than a guy who's throwing 94, 95. And to think that, you know, knock on wood, the Dodgers get to the postseason, the baseball season continues, but to think that, you know, you could get 6 innings out of Clayton Kershaw and then go 7, 8, 9 with guys like Gratterall and Treinen and Baez and Jansen and even Ferguson, who's touching 96, 97. I mean, Jansen's obviously not throwing that hard, but I mean, Gratterall, it's like every other pitch is over 100. Treinen's touching 99. Ferguson, like I said, 96, 97. So it just feels like the firepower, and I think you referenced this, but just this, like the pure speed. Joe Kelly, I didn't even mention Joe Kelly, who could throw 100 miles an hour. I mean, that feels like the difference. This is a good bullpen, but it also feels like a playoff bullpen to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% there. And that's what you want to see from the guys who are, you know, coming in late in games. You want to see them, you know, coming in, throwing gas and being dominant. You know, that's what wins in the postseason. And we're not even talking about the guys who are in the starting rotation right now that may not, you know, be there when everyone's healthy. So you might be looking at adding some guys like maybe a Dustin May to the bullpen, Tony Gonsolin, maybe a Ross Stripling if everyone's healthy. So when you look at the collection of arms they could put together for a potential postseason run, it's pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was a start early where Buehler's coming out and Buehler's throwing 96, 97. It was like more than half of the pitches the Giants saw, I think, were over, 96 miles an hour. And a number of those are over 99 miles an hour. And so it does feel different. I mean, Treinen just right off the bat feels like a guy that you can just trust. Even Gratterall, he gave up a run tonight, but it just feels different. I mean, when he's out there, it tends to not be strong content. It's weak contact. And I mean, we haven't even talked about Baez, who the sabermetrics still love this guy. I mean, his on base percentage and stuff like that is still nasty. And Jansen's looked all right. I mean, I joke it's the Kenley Jansen experience every time he comes in a close game, and there have been a couple of those where it's like, well, here we go, buckle up. But at the end of the day, he's done his job so far. The cutter, it's ticking up a little bit, but the movement is there. That's Dave Roberts' big thing. And so I definitely think that's a plus. And I'm with you. I mean, I think, just how good they have been, it almost has saved them, I think, in some other ways, because we're going to talk about the offense in a little bit. But I think their bullpen has probably kept them in, got them a couple wins that maybe prevents this from being a little more panicky than the rest. So that kind of leads nicely into my number one observation storyline this far this season, and it's Dave Roberts. And we're talking about the bullpen and the guy who's got to make decisions about what he does with the bullpen. And like it or not, Dave Roberts, I think, has been a storyline for the Dodgers this season. So let me clarify what I mean by this, okay? So the other night we had guys tweeting at us that Dave Roberts is the worst manager in Dodgers history, telling me he'd take Davey Johnson and Grady Little over Dave Roberts. Let me be clear that I am not saying any of that. Dave Roberts is the best manager the Dodgers have had in a long, long time. But I think already this season, we've been reminded that he isn't perfect. Now, Roberts is great at one thing. Roberts is a fantastic manager. He's fantastic at managing the clubhouse, balancing platoons, keeping guys happy, holding people accountable. He genuinely might be the best guy in the majors when it comes to that. And so, but when it comes to in-game management, watch out. This isn't new. We've all know about the playoff disasters. But in the 4 losses this season, Roberts has had big questions, I think, to answer post-game in 2 of them. So the first one was early against the Giants. The Dodgers are down 3-1 in the bottom of the 8th. They've got runners at first and second with 1 out. There's a right-hander on the mound, and Chris Taylor's on the up to bat. Now, Jock Peterson is on the bench. Matt Beatty's on the bench. Edwin Rios is on the bench. He leaves Chris Taylor in to hit. He gets out, grounds out. Next batter, I believe, is Corey Seager, who gets on to load the bases. Kike Hernandez up, still facing a right-hander. Jock Peterson, Matt Beatty, Edwin Rios, all on the bench. Roberts leaves Kike in there. Kike grounds out. Dodgers lose 3-1. Now, Roberts is a guy that plays the platoons, more than anybody. The Dodgers believe in the splits more than anybody. And they would say, well, this guy's in particular, maybe his splits aren't as good, blah, blah, blah. But it was a questionable moment twice. That wasn't the only time in that game, but it was a big moment. Then, of course, a few nights later, we've got the Diamondbacks. There's runners on second and third. Blake Trinan's on the mound. The Dodgers decide to intentionally walk Eduardo Escobar up by 2 runs, who Escobar, by the way, has been terrible this season, to face Christian Walker, who's been good this season. Walker doubles. Oh, by the way, Escobar's the game-winning run to cross the plate. Roberts defends it post-game by saying something about playing for a tie on the road. It made no sense to me. I would add in here the fact that Austin Barnes plays as much as he does probably belongs in the category of like, Dave Roberts, What are we doing here? But in a season where it feels like every game matters this much. That 3-1 Giants game, I wanted to put my head through a wall. It was like the most painful sports experience I've had in a long time. And when every game is magnified like that, the decisions that Roberts makes, there's no margin for error, and he's missing them. And I think it's something that if you're a Dodger fan, it's at some point this becomes a problem. I don't know if we're there yet.
This isn't a new thing, right? You've mentioned past postseasons. This is something we've seen, for a while now. So I definitely think it is a problem at this point, because when you can't count on at least the right decisions on paper to be made, going out and executing it is a completely, different thing, of course. And I believe some of the players, get some of the blame as well. It's not all on Dave Roberts. He could only put them in positions to succeed, and it's up to them to go out and do it. But when we continuously see, the same mistakes made over and over again, it is a bit worrisome. And honestly, oddly enough, I think a lot of the mistakes he's made have come when he goes, against the analytics, and people criticize him and the organization too much for sticking with the analytics and going with the matchups and whatnot. But I feel like when he strays away from that is when he actually has issues. The Austin Barnes fascination is another thing. I don't get why he's playing every other day. Will Smith is far superior in my mind than anyone who watches. So I don't know what that's about. Hopefully, as the season goes, that changes a little more. But yeah, I think we're at the point where it is concerning with some of the decisions that Dave Roberts has made.
Yeah, and you'd think with the designated hitter, maybe that would take some pressure off of Roberts, because there's a lot less double switching, and yet there's 30 guys on the roster, so there's more potential moves. There's more potential things to consider, and it's like I love Roberts. I love what he does. I love the culture that clearly exists within the Dodger clubhouse, and yet I mean, there's moments in the playoffs where it's like, I just can't forget about these things. And when you sort of give me PTSD and then you bring these moments up in a 3-1 loss to the Giants or against the Diamondbacks, and I'm waiting, people are like, well, we'll see what Dave Roberts says after the game. I'm like, I don't want to hear what he says after the game because it's probably going to piss me off. And sure enough, it's like, oh, we play for the win. We don't play for the tie. It's like, what does that have to do with why you didn't want to face Eduardo Escobar and you wanted to face Christian Walker? Like, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. Because whatever. There's 100 things to go down. But yeah, I mean, so for me, that's one of the big storylines. The Dodgers are 7-4. Everyone's expecting them to make a playoffs, be a World Series favorite. And there's one thing that I'm most concerned that could cost the Dodgers. I think it's Roberts right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
What do you got for number 2?
My next one, I'm gonna be a little more positive here. My second storyline is just Mookie Betts, who we've all come to know and love so well these last couple weeks. But first of all, when they traded for him, they had absolutely no reassurances that they were going to be able to ink him to that extension. They knew he was a free agent in a year, and they knew they wanted to keep him, but they didn't know if the money would work out. They didn't know if he even wanted to stay. So I think regardless of what happens on the field this season, 2020 should be considered a win just for the fact that they got him locked up and he's going to be here for the next 12 years. But then on the field, I mean, what's not to love about Mookie Betts? He does it all. He's a true 5-tool player. We've spoke about it pretty much every show. I feel like every game he plays in, it feels like he does something, special that makes you go, wow. And sometimes, it doesn't always end up in the box score. It might be, him cutting off a ball and holding a guy to a single instead of a double. It might be him making a throw on the money like we saw the other night. It might be, some savvy base running. It might be taking a walk when he needs to, or it might be hitting a home run. He does it all. He's young. He's in the prime of his career. He's great in the community. He's going to do awesome things in LA. And we got this guy locked up, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there's already 3 plays that I feel like stand out to me. The first is opening day. He scores on the infield ground ball to put the Dodgers up ahead. I mean, that was play number 1 where it's like, okay, this guy's different. Play number 2, the throw from right field, 100 yards on the money, throws the guy out at third. And then play number 3 was last night, Sunday night. He swings, he jams his finger, does something to it, who knows what. The broadcasts are like, what's going on? I mean, he's holding his finger weird. Well, what does he go and do? He hits an opposite field home run to right center field. So it's like, what can't this guy do? I mean, you have the intangibles, you have the little things. Clearly, the guys like him. Clearly, Andrew Friedman looks at his work ethic and how he gets along, and he's like, we have no doubts on that side. You've got the arm, you've got the defense, you've got the ability to hit an opposite field home run with a jacked up finger that prevented him from playing tonight. I'm with you. I mean, I think there's nothing that can, even if this season were to fall apart, that it can't totally be spoiled because Mookie Betts is going to be a Dodger for the rest of his life, and that's great. I mean, I'm one of the guys where I would look at his numbers and I would say, okay, I get that he's really, really good, but I don't see greatness. I look at the WAR and it says greatness. I look at the average home runs and stuff. It's like, these are really good numbers, but it wasn't like Mike Trout numbers. Well, then you watch him play and you're like, okay, I get it. Like I needed 11 games, 10 games. He didn't even play tonight. 10 games. I'm like, I get it. All the money in the world, it's yours, Mookie. I'm in.
Yeah, and when you're talking about giving that type of money, $360 million, or if it's $390 if you count this year, you want to give it to a guy who's going to be a leader in the clubhouse, who's going to hustle every single play out, who's going to play hard every day, going to do great things in the community, and that's Mookie Betts. And I also think he has a game that's going to age pretty well too. He's not big, and his body's going to break down when he gets into his 30s. He's a smaller, athletic guy. Doesn't really get hurt a lot. I know his fingers hurt right now, but that's nothing serious. He'll be back in there in the next couple games. So I think he's been as good as advertised so far, and I think he has even better days ahead, which is pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number 2 on my list is maybe the guy offensively who, not even maybe, I think is probably the number 1 storyline. This was going to be Cody Bellinger slumping, but tonight he had his second home run in 2 nights. So I think we've kind of dialed that one back a little bit. But it's Corey Seager. It's your guy, Corey Seager. I think you're just being nice to me, and you're going to let me say nice things about Corey Seager, which I appreciate. But, I mean, the sabermetric stuff on Corey Seager this year is absolute foolishness. I mean, you look at his actual numbers and it's like, wow, he's great. And then you look at like his expected numbers based on how hard he's hitting the ball and all that, and it's like otherworldly. So as far as percentage of the time that he barrels a ball, Corey Seager, number one in the league, 22.5%. To give you context, he is 3.5% better than anybody else in the league at that. I mean, 22.5% to 19 is absolutely astonishing when we're comparing an entire league. Okay, hard hit balls hit over 95 miles an hour. Corey Seager, first in the league with 21 of them. He is 3 more than anybody else in the league. By the way, Mookie Betts is second with 18. Okay. His batting average, 361, 425 on base, 694 slugging percentage, 3 home runs. I believe he's got his 4th double of the season tonight, 3 strikeouts. It's like there's nobody I'm more confident in. He is hitting everything on a rope.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone who watches this show knows how much I love Corey Seager, so that's why I let you have this one. Everyone's been listening to me talk about him for the past few weeks. But yeah, everything you said is right on the money. He's been incredible. I think people kind of forgot how good he was. He's been injured the past few years. He hasn't been his usual self. But we're talking about a guy who came up his rookie season. He was, a unanimous Rookie of the Year, finished 3rd in the MVP voting. Followed that up with another All-Star season, another, top 10 MVP finish. So and he's still only 26 years old, maybe. So he's still young, honestly, entering the prime of his career. So he's been, ever since they reported to summer camp, he's looked just incredible, and he's carried it into the regular season. And I don't see really any signs of his slowing down. He's probably not going to hit 360 the whole year, but at the same time, he's hitting the ball hard every time up there. Honestly, his batting average right now should be higher than 360. He's just been awesome.
I think they said on the broadcast his expected slugging percentage was like 900, something outrageous. But I mean, as you said, he just turned 26 at the end of April. He's 5th in baseball right now in wins above replacement. Mookie Betts is 6th in wins above replacement. Now that's early. Mike Krzyzewski of the Giants is number 1 on that list, by the way. So that's a whole nother story. But he's fantastic. He's fantastic. This is a guy that both you and I said before the season. I mean, this is a guy who has flashed MVP potential. I believe he finished top 5 in MVP voting as a rookie. He has that in him. He's battled injuries. We saw it at summer camp. And anybody who paid attention to summer camp, which you and I were both desperate enough for baseball to be dialed into intra-squad games, it's like, are people seeing this? Because he's hitting the Dodger pitching, which best ERA in baseball right now. And it's like, I mean, he's just spraying the ball on a line. There's nothing more signature to me than the Corey Seager opposite field double to the gap, where it just feels like he could just drop that in anytime he wants. So, I mean, he could have had his 4th home run tonight. He missed it by about 6 inches. Instead, he had to settle for his 4th double. But the guy is amazing, and there's no reason to believe he can't continue doing this. That's the best part. There's some guys where you're like, okay, I mean, when's this going to end? Corey Seager, it's like, no. I mean, I think he's capable of this. So it'll be fascinating to see what that looks like for the next 49 games. What do you got, number 3?
Number 3, I got Clayton Kershaw. It was a little scary when, we're getting set for opening day, and a few hours before the game, all of a sudden he's on the IL and he's scratched with a back injury, and it's like, here we go again. We've seen this from him, every year seemingly for the past few years, and this is a shortened year, so obviously you don't want to see him injured before he even makes his own start. But he missed 1 or 2 starts, and he came back against the Arizona Diamondbacks yesterday and honestly looked like vintage Clayton Kershaw. He was throwing as hard as he's thrown, or harder than he's thrown the last couple of years. I think he had like 19 or 20 pitches at 92 or above, which is more than all of last season combined. So he went to Driveline in the offseason. It looks like he got some of his velo back, and I think that honestly helps out his other stuff as well. When he's throwing a fastball at 89, 90 and his sliders at 88, 89, that's not much deception there. It's not much difference. So if now he's throwing his slider at 87 and his fastball at 92, 93, that's a little different there. And he was getting a ton of swing and misses. He struck out 6 and 5 2/3. Didn't really have any traffic all day. I know it's only 1 start, but that's the Clayton Kershaw that we want to see. And with so many other question marks in the rotation right now, David Price opted out, Alex Wood's hurt, Walker Buehler's still getting built up. He hasn't looked like himself yet. I think this team needs Clayton Kershaw to be Clayton Kershaw. So just seeing him out there looking good and coming out of it healthy too is equally as important. I thought it was a really positive sign.
Yeah, I mean, you could not have asked for anything more out of Kershaw's performance. Again, this guy's 32 years old. Like we sometimes we treat him like he's like 38. He's 32. So there's no reason to believe that he doesn't have 4 to 5 more good to great years in him. I was reminded today, somebody sent me this. And since 2014 in baseball, Clayton Kershaw has a 2.26 ERA since 2014. Next best on that list is DeGrom at 2.61. So 0.35. Then you got Scherzer at 2.81, Kluber at 2.94, and Greinke at 2.96. I mean, Kershaw is unbelievable. As you said, he tapped back into where he was 2 seasons ago, which was great. I mean, this is the greatest pitcher of this generation. I'm biased as I say that. Some people could argue for a guy like Scherzer or Verlander, but he's unbelievable. And yeah, I mean, he looked so good. Every pitch working. He looked happy. He looked loose. It was perfection. It was everything you wanted to see as a Dodger fan, I think.
Yeah, and I think the shortened season is actually going to be a benefit for him. He at this stage of his career with how many innings he's thrown, he doesn't need to be throwing 200 innings this year. If, maybe he makes 10 starts and then he's, in mid-season form when the postseason rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads into my third takeaway, which is just the young guys. I've been super impressed by the guys that the Dodgers have had to lean on. You look at the rotation, Clayton Kershaw the day before, back tightens up. Dustin May's announced the day of opening day starter. You've got Tony Gonsolin, who's had to make a start. Will Smith, as we've mentioned, behind the plate. Brusdar Graterol in the bullpen. Edwin Rios off the bench. I mean, all of these guys are guys that are not proven veterans. They've yet to fully establish themselves, and yet all of those guys I just mentioned have been really, really good. I mean, Dustin May has been nasty in his starts. I mean, some of the movement that he gets on his two-seamer and his slider do not seem fair. And this is a young guy that's only going to get better. Tony Gonsolin, right? We joked our number 8 starter is better than your number 8 starter. I mean, Gonsolin comes in, he's touching 96. He looked really, really good. It's like, wait, why isn't this guy part of the 5-man rotation? He was fantastic. Will Smith, I mean, you saw it tonight, a huge double. Brusdar Graterol, again, we've already talked about. My guy, Edwin Rios, wearing Raul Mondesi's number, just the sweetest swing. I mean, when he put that ball in Arizona just to the deepest part of the park, about 35 feet up, it was so smooth, so smooth. I can't get enough Edwin Rios in my life. And, he's a guy where it's like, this guy would be playing every day on any other roster in baseball other than the Dodgers, and he barely sniffs the field. But I think just that group, we haven't even talked about Gavin Lux, right? I mean, now, of course, that's some controversial stuff that we can leave for another conversation, but he's another guy that's going to be a part of this. Dennis Santana probably qualifies as a young guy who had a big night in the extra inning game. So, I mean, just the input that they're getting from these guys has been super encouraging to me. And it's a reminder that this Dodger team's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and just a quick story about Edwin Rios. The first time I saw him play in person was in spring training. I think it was 2017. He was a young prospect at the time, and the Dodgers had a split squad game, so I was there covering with Matt Moreno, who's another the guy who's in charge of Dodger Blue, the managing editor. So he stayed for the home game, and I went for the away game on the split squad. And so I mainly got to see minor leaguers, but one of them was Edwin Rios, and I had no clue who he was. But he came up in his first at-bat and hit a towering home run to center field, and it went over the batter's eye. It cleared the batter's eye, which is about 40 feet high. And then he came up again in his third or fourth at-bat and did the exact same thing, hit it over the batter's eye again. So, yeah, Rios has been on my radar ever since then. The guy's got tremendous power. Good to see him, getting some time. Hopefully he gets some more, playing time against right-handed pitching because he just mashes. Needs to cut down on his strikeouts a little bit, but that's okay. He's still young and finding his way. But yeah, all the young guys have looked really good, and that's not something that's new. That we've seen that pretty much every year. Mm-hmm. Young guys come up and contribute right away, and I think that's just a testament also to the leadership in that clubhouse. That a young guy could come up from the minor leagues. I know there's no minor leagues this year, but in a typical year they could come up and just step right in and not skip a beat, and produce right away. And that's because some of the veterans like JT and Kirsch and all those guys, they're all just so welcoming to the young guys. They make them feel comfortable. comfortable, and it's really cool to see. So many guys who might not shouldn't even be in the big leagues yet are coming up and just contributing right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and Joe Davis loves the Edwin Rios stat where in 58 at-bats, he has 6 home runs. It's like the all-time pace for home runs per at-bat. But, I mean, he's 26, but he's got 58 career at-bats, and he's played the field and looked good in the field. And so, yeah. I mean, overall, there's a lot to like, obviously, with the Dodgers. They lead the league in home runs, I believe. They're 7-4. It's not maybe as torrid of a start as people were hoping for, but I think you see in kind of the observations you've had, the observations overall, it's positive. Now, there are some questions. I brought up Roberts. We'll get to Walker Buehler here in a little bit, but overall, things have been really, really good for the Dodgers. And yet, one of the reasons that I think people maybe are a little more tense, if you had told either of us, hey, you know what, you're going to start 7-4, I think both of us would be like, great, sign me up. Where do I sign on the dotted line? Let's just get the season underway, win 7 of the first 11, sweep the Astros, fine. How much do I have to pay you for that? But, like, we'd be thrilled with how things are going. And yet, it feels a little tense. And the reason is the Dodgers are tied for second in the National League West. The Rockies have a better winning percentage than them. They're tied with the Padres. And so the NL West has presented a challenge. Now, you and I talked before the season. We both thought the Padres were the second best team. I don't think anybody had the Rockies on their radar, but the Padres, as it stands, number 1 in the league in runs. Rockies are number 2 in average. They're number 5 in ERA. I mean, the Rockies are number 5 in ERA. If you want to talk about something that's going to regress to the mean, it's the Rockies having the number 5 ERA in baseball. But, I mean, if you watch the Dodger game on Monday night tonight, you saw Paddock. You'll see, some of their other young arms, Lamet tomorrow. I mean, these guys are good. And so, one guy on Twitter, Frank Martinez, asked this question, which I think is the one that sets it up. Is this a division that's going to see 3 teams in the playoffs? So let's start there, Daniel. Do you think the NL West sees 3 teams make the playoffs?
I definitely think they could. We're talking about an expanded postseason, so that's 8 teams are going to make it from the NL, 2 from every division. So we already got 2 in. Let's just presume it's the Dodgers and the Padres because they've been. Obviously, the Rockies have the best record, but I still think we need to give them more time before we completely buy into them. But I think the Dodgers and the Padres came in with the highest expectations, and to this point, they've done nothing to really change that, I don't think. So then you're just looking at, can the Rockies stay hot? Will the Diamondbacks heat up at some point? They've been pretty bad. I think the Giants have actually been decent, but I'm not really going to consider them. I think they've just been okay, and they'll probably get worse as the season goes. But I do think maybe, in a 60-game season, maybe the Rockies, their pitching could hold it together for long enough to make the postseason. I don't know about, making any noise once they're there, but, we're talking about 8 teams making it here. It's not like you have to go 40-20 to make the postseason this year. We're going to see teams that are either around 500 or below 500 even making it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at some of the win totals, so the 8th best team in the National League was projected to win about 31.5 games. So you figure the 8th best team in the National League, which it might not even be the 8th best because of records and who finishes second, right, whatever. But, 31.5, 32, and 28, I mean, that's not great. Now, what's fascinating is that the Padres and the Rockies were actually the 11th and 12th best win totals in the National League projected. So, I mean, the Rockies are outperforming themselves. The Padres are outperforming themselves. The Diamondbacks were actually projected to be the second best team in the division. So that's something interesting. The Diamondbacks projected at 31 wins. The Rockies 27.5. The Padres at 30.5. So a pretty big gap between the Padres and Rockies. I mean, the Rockies already have 7 wins. They only got to get to 28 till people start cashing bets. But, I mean, you look around, as you pointed out, the new system, top 2 teams in each division make it, and then the best 2 third-place teams also make it. So you look around the division. Now, the NL East is hilarious because you've got the Braves at 7-4. Second place in the NL East right now. Do you know who that is, Daniel?
Probably the Marlins at like 2-1.
The Marlins at 2-1 is correct. Nationals at 3-4 in third. Phillies at 1-3 in fourth, and the Mets at 4-7 in fifth. So, I mean, that's a disaster. How do you make sense of that? But even you look at the Central. The second place team is 5-5. The third place team is 3-4. So the Dodgers, tied for third, basically the third place team in the NL West, have a 4-game lead on the third place team in both of the other divisions. Now, it's incredibly early. We're not expecting this type of thing from the Rockies. I think you and I aren't super surprised by the Padres, but it will be interesting. Right. I mean, they're off to a hot start, and yeah, I mean, 2 out of 3 divisions are going to get a third place team. So you look around and you say, Are we really? I mean, and then you look. I think the Dodgers are going to make the playoffs. So if the Rockies and the Padres keep up this pace or anything close to it, neither of us are worried about the Dodgers making it. But I mean, I didn't see this from the Rockies. You know, if I could bet the under from here on out, I probably would. I'm not buying it. Whereas the Padres, I think I am. I mean, I think they just, for them, it's, do they get to a place where they actually believe in themselves? And at this point, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and we both had the Padres as the second best team, and we both said that's the one team to be a little bit scared about, especially in a shorter season. So I'm not surprised by the Padres' hot start. Definitely the Rockies have been surprising, but it's still super early. We're looking at, they haven't even played the Dodgers yet, and the Dodgers have, historically owned the Rockies over the last decade or so. So we'll see how their pitching holds up. We know they got some hitters. They play at Coors Field, so they're going to hit. So it'll all come down to their pitching. And even when you look at their bullpen, it hasn't been great. Wade Davis has already blown a couple saves, and he's on the IL. Scott Oberg, who was their best reliever last year, is out for the year with an injury. So we'll see if their pitching could hold it together.
Yeah. Well, that'll be something to watch. And, obviously a big part of it is all these games basically are 2/3 of your games are division games. So that brings us to tonight's game, Monday night. Dodgers lose 5-4 to the Padres. Jock Peterson, first pitch of the game, gets a home run. Buehler gives it right back in the bottom to Trent Grisham. Padres take a lead in the bottom of the fourth. The Dodgers come right back in the top of the fifth to take a 3-2 lead on a Will Smith double, which, by the way, man, getting picked off of third base is absolutely unacceptable there, but that's another conversation. Yeah. The Padres come right back and get two more in the sixth. And from there, it was the Dodgers. Bellinger gets a home run in the top of the ninth to cut it to 5-4, but the Dodgers lose. So I think the big storyline for me is Walker Buehler, 5 innings, 3 hits, all 3 of them home runs, 3 earned runs, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. I think the alarming thing to me, I think at one point he had thrown 61 pitches and 31 of them were strikes and 30 of them were balls. He finishes with 43 strikes and 36 balls. Season ERA is at 5.19. He's not striking guys out. He's not missing bats. I mean, it's his second start. This was a guy they knew wasn't going to be quite ready at the beginning of the season. So if you think, hey, some of those guys got like 2 summer camp starts, he didn't get any. This would have been his second. Maybe the next or the 4th start is when we kind of dial it in. But it wasn't pretty from Walker Buehler. I mean, was he the headline for you tonight?
Yeah, he was the guy I was going to mention and talk about first. He didn't look great. Yeah, as you said, he's not missing a ton of bats. His command's off a little bit. But I don't think this is much different than what we saw from him for his first few starts last year. He was slow played in spring training, so he wasn't fully built up. He had a little arm issue. So he didn't look great his first few starts, and then as the season went along, he caught his groove and he was Walker Buehler again. So I'm not, pushing the panic button yet. It's still only 2 starts. He only threw 5 innings and 78 pitches, so he's still building his pitch count up. But yeah, through his first 2 starts, he has not looked great, and I'm not exactly sure the reason why he didn't come to camp as built up as some of the other starters. But I guess just the nature of the uncertainty of when the season was going to start and all that. Maybe he didn't have, access to a place to throw every day. So I'm not going to put too much blame on him. But I think as he continues to get built up and he's, 3, 4, 5 starts down the road, we'll look back on this and laugh a little bit. Like, why were we're not freaking out, but why were we at least a little bit concerned? Yeah. But yeah, he hasn't looked great, but I'm still optimistic he'll be fine.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, he had 8 hard hit balls given up. I mean, Paddock on the other side had 9, and nobody's worried about Paddock and the way he looked. Of course, Buehler had 3 walks, Paddock had none. So, and I mean, Paddock's another storyline for me. This is a young pitcher that people are high on. It's a guy that Dodgers are going to have to get used to. That changeup he has looks nasty. Guys were sort of hoping to get fastball, basically, and hoping they could put it in play, but. The Padres are no joke. You look at that lineup, and I mean, there's not a lot of easy outs other than Austin Hedges, who's terrible, but he did get an RBI tonight. I think they said it was his first hit of the season. But
it was.
I mean, some of those guys, even if they're just names, Machado, Tatis, Will Myers. I mean, they're just tough at bats. Hosmer's not even in there, which whatever. Eric Hosmer's not a whole lot to. But again, it's a guy who can give you a professional at bat. So that was another storyline for me. Is just how good the Padres Paddock looked. And we're getting another good young arm tomorrow night, and the other thing for me was just the bullpen. I mean, the Dodger bullpen has been so good, but they weren't perfect tonight. Gratterall came in, kind of got a little bad luck. with a blooper that drops into center, a slow roller that sort of leaves a guy at second. A guy hits a single hard into left field. I missed that one. It looks soft to me, 102 miles an hour. So I was wrong on that one on Twitter. So they give up a run. Then Caleb Ferguson comes in. I think they said on the broadcast he had given up one hit prior to this game. First two pitches are singles, both smashed. Now it's 5-3. And, you look at the Padres bullpen, and it pretty much felt insurmountable. So I don't want to overreact to this game, but it wasn't a great one for the Dodgers.
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't. I'll point to one other positive, though. How about Jock Peterson back in the leadoff spot for the first time all year? First pitch of the game goes, oppo over the left center field fence. So that was good to see. Another back to Dave Roberts momentarily, real quick. But we've seen him, messing with the lineup a lot this year. He's got Mookie leading off one day, then Muncy the next, depending on the hand of the pitcher and blah, blah, blah. I've talked on this show about how I don't really love that as much. But I think if you're going to put a left-handed hitter in the leadoff hole, at least, put someone who's been there before and who's comfortable there. And as we saw tonight, that's Jock Peterson. The last 2 years, he's set the franchise record for leadoff home runs. I think he had 8 2 years ago, and then he broke his own record last year and had 9. So he's a guy who's comfortable in the leadoff spot. I still prefer Mookie there when he's healthy every day. Just put him there and leave him there. And then I'd put Corey Seager second and leave him there just because of how great he's been. But if you're going to put a lefty, I think it would be Jock. And I still like Muncy, down there in the middle somewhere where he could drive and run.
Yeah. I think my favorite part about the Jock Peterson home run was that was a very aggressive home run pimp job because that ball got to like the third row. And he acted like it was a no-doubter. And then later in the game, Muncy did the same thing. And Muncy's warning track. I mean, it's like the air must be heavy in San Diego because those guys thought they clobbered him, and Jock barely got out, and Muncy's didn't. So, but yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Jock, he's got the confidence, the swagger to be the leadoff guy and to be looking dead red on a fastball first pitch of the game and just be looking to crush it. So I'm with you. I mean, and it was good. I think they said now that Jock has a home run, basically Turner's the only everyday guy that hasn't gotten one yet. And Turner's look good. It's just we haven't seen the power come yet. So, I agree with you on that. That was definitely a positive to see Jock get off to a good start there. And again, unfortunately, it's like the bottom half of the inning and that lead's given away. But we're not worried about Buehler, just like we weren't worried about Bellinger. So as long as if your problems are, can Cody Bellinger figure it out? And when Walker Buehler, will he settle in? You're like, okay, I'm not going to be. Yeah. Are the Dodgers going to make the playoffs? Yes, without a doubt. Are these things going to be figured out 25, 30 games from now? Without a doubt. So we can move along. Exactly. So one question we got on Twitter here, we'll change pace a little bit before we get into some Major League Baseball news. I thought this was an interesting one. I know I'm putting you on the spot when I ask you this, but this was from John Aviles. He asked, predictions on who plays third base next year. And who they keep in free agency. I imagine this team looks very different next year. Now, we're in game 11 of the season, but I think it's a fair question. Part of what he's referring to is Justin Turner's a free agent at third base, and there's a lot of questions about how things move around. Where does Gavin Lux fit in? Guys like Edwin Rios, etc. So, I mean, where you're looking right now, is Justin Turner the third baseman 2021 opening day for the Dodgers?
I think if there's any of their free agents this offseason that they would look to retain, it would be Justin Turner just because of how awesome he's been. He's getting up there in age. I'm not sure exactly how old he is. His defense may have declined a little bit, but he's still Justin Turner. He's still a force in the middle of that lineup. He's still great in the clubhouse. He's arguably the best leader on that team. He's outstanding in the community. Him and his wife Courtney, through their foundation, do some great work. So I think if there's anyone that they would look to retain, it would be him. And I also think he would maybe take a little hometown discount. He's from Long Beach, so he knows he loves LA obviously, and if they don't win the World Series this year, I know he'll want to come back and try and get it again just because of how close they've gotten. So I think when you look at all the free agents this offseason, it's him, it's Jock, it's Kike, and it's Pedro Baez. I might be missing one other guy, but those are the main guys. The other three, I'm pretty much expecting them to walk just because they have guys that could replace them and they'll probably get paid elsewhere. But I think Justin Turner's the one guy they might keep. But let's say they don't. If we're talking about third base options, you got one option is moving Max Muncy there. He's been, he hasn't been bad at third base. That opens more at bats at first base for Rios or Beatty. And those two guys I just mentioned could also play third. I think Muncy might be a little bit better defensively than them. But either way, they got options, and there's also another option if they want to, if they want to move, Corey Seager off a shortstop, just because you don't see 6'4", 6'5" guys stay at shortstop their whole career. If you look at Cal Ripken or A-Rod, they move off there eventually, and he's had a few injuries, so maybe they want to move him to third, and then Gavin Lux could play short, so that's an option as well. But we'll just have to wait and see. That's looking way too far ahead right now, in my opinion.
Well, and I mean, there's lots of questions of, is there a DH? I think if there's a DH in the National League, that makes a big difference. Sure. But the biggest thing to me about Turner is he is the single hitter that you trust the most in the postseason. I mean, if there's one thing about the Dodgers that would be a critique, is that this is a great regular season team and a poor postseason team. Justin Turner is the antithesis to that. Like, he is the one guy who seems to get better in the postseason. He is 34. He'll turn 35 this offseason. But again, his game is not predicated on athleticism. His game is predicated on hand-eye coordination, and that's not going anywhere. So I'm with you. He's already gotten one contract, so he's not a guy that's like, hey, I need to get paid to set myself up. He's got plenty of money. He's, by all accounts, a guy who's going to be incredibly successful post-playing career, whether that's coaching or broadcasting or whatever he wants to do. So to me, it's got to be Turner. I think there's enough ways to get a guy like Gavin Lux, who's really the only guy that sort of is demanding a spot to be in the lineup next year. But I am with you. Right. I think a guy like Jock Peterson, Kike Hernandez are both probably guys who walk. Then you've got some bullpen arms, the other ones. You mentioned Pedro Baez. Blake Trinan is on a 1-year deal. Alex Wood is the other one. And who knows? Alex Wood's hurt right now. But, I mean, I think at the bullpen side, there's no, the Dodgers aren't overloaded with arms there necessarily. So it'll definitely be interesting. But I'm with you. I think if one of those free agents is going to be retained, Turner is the guy who seems to make the most sense. And also remember, this is an organization that values clubhouse chemistry seemingly more than anybody else. And I think there is no doubt that Justin Turner is the leader in the clubhouse. I don't think Clayton Kershaw, has the respect of everybody in there, but he's not a rah-rah guy. I think Kenley Jansen sort of is that to some degree, but I think, Mookie Betts will be that a year from now. A guy like David Price, I'm sure, will have a role in there as well. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Justin Turner is the unquestioned leader of the Dodgers. And so I don't think the Dodgers are going to risk that. I think, you take the money that needs to be, you just ask him for a reasonable number and make it happen. So we appreciate the question, John, but there you go. We're both saying Justin Turner plays third base, and he'll be back next year. So we'll see. But let's end the show with some rapid fire Major League Baseball news. I know so much of it. There's so much going on in the sports world. There might not be anything going on elsewhere, but there is a lot going on in the sports world. Basketball is back. The Lakers played, so maybe you've missed out on some Major League Baseball news. We'll start with the one Dodgers piece, and then we'll get around the league. Joe Kelly, 8-game suspension. I have a feeling you and I both feel the same way about this, Daniel. I can start real quick. I just think it's ridiculous. He gets 8 games for not even hitting a guy. Now, I'll say this. I'm very anti throwing a fastball anywhere near a guy's head. And Joe Kelly threw a fastball near this guy's head. Now, Andrew Friedman had a great quote. If you haven't listened to the Joe and Oral podcast where they interview Friedman and Dave Roberts, it's fantastic. He basically says, look, if there's one thing Joe Kelly's good at, it's not knowing where the ball is going to be thrown. And I think that outing to some degree proves that. That was a 4-pitch walk. Yeah. He had another 4-pitch walk. If you watch the game tonight, he had a 4-pitch walk. I mean, the curveball to Correa, we're not even going to talk about. You don't try and hit a guy with a curveball. If Kelly wanted to hit Correa, he was going to throw a fastball at him. But so I'm not the guy who says he shouldn't be suspended at all, because I do think there's enough sort of intent and there's enough reason to believe that, look, a game or two, especially in a season where everything is magnified. I mean, an 8-game suspension is unbelievable in a 162-game series season. In a 60-game season, it's absolutely crazy. So not even talking about right now, because we can get into the fact that the Astros have not been punished for anything, but 8 games for Joe Kelly for this. He didn't hit him. It's completely up for debate. I might say 60%. He was trying to do it 40%. He wasn't. But 8 games is crazy to me. Yeah,
I agree. We've seen guys who charge the mound and have full-on fights get suspended for less games. And also, we need to take into account, this is a 60-game season here, so suspending a guy 8 games is like suspending him 22 in a regular season. So I thought it was a bit egregious. I don't know how you could assume that he was thrown at his head. I don't know if you saw, I got into it with Lance McCullers on Twitter a little bit the day after when he had some just ridiculous comments about how it was unprofessional thrown at his head. But even if let's say Joe Kelly was trying to throw at him and send a message, we know the guy's got no command. So just because it went behind his head doesn't mean he was aiming for his head, And yeah, he didn't hit anyone. Look, I get why MLB had to suspend him. You got to send a message that, look, we're in a pandemic right now. We already got teams with coronavirus. We don't want more, so we can't have benches clearing type incidents where guys are in each other's faces. I get that, but for Joe to get all 8 games and then Dave Roberts gets 1 for some reason and no one on the Astros got anything, even though they were the ones who started the yapping. We heard it on TV. Dusty Baker yell at Joe Kelly to get back on the mound, little blank. So we heard it wasn't just the Dodgers doing all the chirping. We know Correa probably said something to Kelly after the strikeout that got him to make the faces or whatever. It's not like Joe was just doing that unprovoked. So I thought it was ridiculous. And he's appealing it that we haven't gotten the results of that yet, so maybe they drop it a couple games. I hope they do. But yeah, it was silly, and at the end of the day, I was just glad the Dodgers got out of there with 2 wins.
Yeah.
That was a good feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it's like if you're going to put any of the bench clearing on the Dodgers, I mean, I've said this. If you watch a replay, Kelly is walking towards his bench, Correa strikes out, and he is the first person to move towards the other group. So if anybody is the one starting that, and again, the irony of Dusty Baker saying it was completely unacceptable what Joe Kelly said to Correa after he struck out. And then it's like, I'm sorry, Dusty, we actually caught you saying your deal. I think it was Pedro Mora that was like, man, that sure sounds like Dusty Baker there. So, I mean, the hypocrisy. And again, I think the headline for most people is the irony of the Astros never got suspended for anything, no punishment of any sort for any of the players. And then the guy, Alex Bregman, who says, hey, let the game police itself. Well, the game was policing itself. And guess what? Major League Baseball had your back. And I mean, it's craziness. It's Joe Kelly. I mean, the nice thing is it's Joe Kelly. So this isn't a guy that the Dodgers are like completely dependent upon. I mean, I don't even know if he's one of the top 5 relievers the Dodgers have right now. So that's the nice thing. They got 30-man rosters, and who knows what's going to be. And I mean, there's a story that they might keep 30-man rosters. They might not make teams go down to 28, which is an interesting thing to monitor. So anyways, that was a very rapid fire. We'll make the rest of these quicker, but we had to get our thoughts out on Joe Kelly on that one. The other big Major League Baseball story right now is the St. Louis Cardinals. So we're sort of almost maybe on the tail end of the Miami Marlins disaster. I think they're putting together a replacement level group of players to play baseball in Miami Marlins uniforms. Meanwhile, the Cardinals, who have had no contact with them, are now the problem. They've got 13 total positives as of Monday. 7 of those are players. May or may not be related to a casino trip. I mean, my first reaction is like, these guys just can't help themselves. I mean, the optimism that this is going to work is dependent upon, it's crazy because you have to be able to trust every single person in every single traveling party. If one person in one traveling party messes this thing up, they hop on a plane with all these other guys, it's a wrap. So, I mean, what's your reaction when you read this? Like, mine is, I can't believe that we think we're going to get this season going.
Yeah, same. I mean, we're not even 2 weeks in, and we had 2 organizations where half their active roster has it, or some staff members. And I also think when taking those numbers into account, you also have to consider that all those people are going home and they're with friends and family. So they just because only one player has it, he might have went home and gave it to 5 more people. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. And I saw the reports about the Marlins in a nightclub and the Cardinals in a casino. We don't know how true that is. I have a feeling there's some truth to it. I don't know who would just make that up. But it's really disappointing to see. Everyone is putting a lot on the line to try and play this season. And for you to just go and do that and put not only you, not only your family, but also your whole team and their families at risk, I think it's, pretty silly. And hopefully, I know there's no positives of guys getting the coronavirus, but hopefully, players and teams around the league could look at what's happened already and realize, hey, like, we have to be serious about this or else the season's going to be shut down next week. So I think it's good to see the Dodgers. They made their protocols a little bit more strict. Guys aren't, high-fiving anymore, which they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. I never understood that to begin with. we saw the Padres tonight were still throwing the ball around,
Yeah.
After a strikeout. I know that's habit. I know guys have been playing baseball for a long time, and that's how they've done it. But we need to break those habits because we want to, play this season. We want a champion to be crowned. We want all 60 games or close to it to be played for every team. So I think guys hopefully are starting to take this more serious, and we'll see if there's another outbreak. And if there is, I don't see how you could continue the season at that point.
Yeah, if two teams don't wake everybody else up, that because I'm not worried about the Dodgers. I look at the Dodgers roster, I'm like, there's no screw ups. There's no guy on here that you can't trust.
Yeah.
They've got a pretty tight rein, but now of course that's you can only control so much. So that'll be fascinating. But yeah, I'm with you. I think if there's one more team that's independently has a breakout of some sort, I think we're in trouble. So okay, some other rapid fires. I know this is a big one for you. Aaron Judge, 6 home runs. You've been tweeting about it. Aaron Judge, 6 home runs. Is this guy the MVP in the American League?
The only reason I've been tweeting about it is because I picked him and Corey Seager as my MVPs. They've both been going off, making me look good. I know it's early, but when Aaron Judge is healthy, he's one of the funnest players to watch just because of how far the ball goes when he gets a hold of it. Like, he hits it 470, and it looks like he didn't even swing very hard. So he's fun to watch. He's healthy, and that Yankees team's looking pretty good. And if all goes to plan, I think we could be looking at the first Dodgers-Yankees World Series in a while here.
Yeah. Well, and Stanton's been mashing the ball there too. He's had some ridiculous exit velocities, I think, even going back to opening day. So on the flip side, some negative news. Ohtani for the Angels, a rough start for him. He now has a forearm strain. He is shut down for the season as a pitcher. They said he's day-to-day as a designated hitter. It's one of those things that's just sad because you kind of start asking the question, is this ever going to work for this guy as a pitcher, or is he just a hitter full-time?
Yeah, and I think, we've been waiting to see it. We got a bit of a glimpse of it his rookie year before he went down with the Tommy John. He pitched, when he was out there throwing 99 miles per hour and then coming back the next day and hitting homers. That's something that, no one really does in this league, and no one has really done it in the past. So I think it's something that everyone wants to see him healthy and out there producing, and it's just sad for baseball that it hasn't really happened yet, and now he's dealing with another arm injury when a guy, with a guy who just had Tommy John, you never want to see him already, dealing with a forearm strain, which is, right next to the elbow, so we know that's related.
Yeah.
So this might be kind of a lost season, but hopefully he could get healthy and back on the mound next year and give it a shot. But it sucks, but that's baseball, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, another piece of news that'll bring Dodger fans some joy: the Houston Astros, unsurprisingly, are struggling to hit baseballs when they don't know what pitch is coming. Jose Altuve is hitting 158. George Springer is hitting 182. Alex Bregman is hitting 211. Carlos Correa has been all right. Altuve, I saw some stat, like he hadn't had 8 strikeouts in 8 games in forever. He had 10 strikeouts in 8 games already this season. I mean, these guys look like a mess, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and they'll get better. They're not going to hit below 2. They're not all going to hit below 200 the whole season, but that doesn't mean we're not going to get our jokes off right now, because it's hilarious to see, and the timing is impeccable. It's their first season coming off the big scandal, and now all of a sudden none of them could hit.
Yeah.
So
pure coincidence.
Wonder why.
Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Well, I mean, on the flip side, another guy who's struggling that I think is a big story, Christian Yelich, 1 for 28 this season, 12 strikeouts. Now the one was a home run, but I mean, it's just fascinating. You think about the sample size, the Astros, Bellinger. I mean, it's got to get in these guys' heads because everything is so magnified. But, I mean, Yelich has been so good for multiple seasons in a row now. To see him start out 1 for 28 with 12 strikeouts is pretty surprising.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've kind of seen, a lot of stars kind of starting off quietly. We've seen it with Cody, although now he's homered in 2 straight games. We see it with Yelich. Ronald Acuna was hitting like 180 the last time I checked. Nolan Arenado finally hit his first home run today. So we've seen a lot of guys kind of struggling out of the gates. I think with guys of that quality, you're definitely not concerned yet. But when you look at that Brewers roster, they kind of need Christian Yelich to carry them. They don't have, they lost Moustakas, they lost Yasmani Grandal. So when you look at that lineup, it's not as scary as it once was. So they need Christian Yelich to be that MVP if they're going to make the postseason.
Yeah. Well, in the last major storyline, I think, was Yenis Cespedes, and whatever the debacle was, basically on Sunday, this report comes out that he didn't show up to the stadium and the Mets have no idea where he is, which at first it's like, oh my gosh, this is a scary situation.
Yeah.
Like, is he okay? And then it was like, okay, he's fine. They just don't know like what the deal is. And then it was like, well, he hasn't told them that he's opting out. And then the story eventually comes out that basically the Mets sent people to his hotel room to check on him. He had cleaned out his hotel room and taken all of his things. He was opting out of the season, which has since been announced, but he just didn't tell anybody. So the Mets basically found out midway through their game on Sunday that he was opting out. I mean, for me, it's like, look, if you want to opt out, good for you. I don't blame you. I think this whole thing's a disaster. I think there's so many consequences and side effects we have no idea about. Opting out is like the completely defensible decision. Now, should you opt out without telling your team? Probably not. Like, probably a little bit better of a move to be like, hey, I'm not going to show up today, and actually I'm not going to show up the rest of the season, and I'll be a free agent, so I'm actually never showing up here again. But, I mean, what was your reaction? Is there any defense to not telling them that you were going to show up?
Yeah, no. Well, at first, I was just wondering, is he okay? So when we found out he was okay, it's like, all right, cool, that's good to know. And then say, yeah, it was a little unprofessional. And when you think about it, his old agent is Brody Van Wagenen, who's the GM of the Mets. So you would think they would have, at least a little bit better of a relationship, that he could at least give him a phone call and tell him what's going on. So yeah, I didn't love that. He, like you said, he has every right to opt out, and he's not the first one to do it. He might not be the last. There's every day it seems guys might be reconsidering, and I can't say I blame him with everything that's going on, but if you're gonna do it, at least have the decency to let the team know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to that point, it will be fascinating. You look at some of these teams that are kind of at the bottom of the standings, and it's like, I mean, if you're a star player on the Pittsburgh Pirates, who are 2-8 now, I don't know if the Pirates have any star players, but some of these groups that are just so bad, just hanging around. I mean, 3-7. The Angels are 3-7. If that gets worse, the Red Sox are 3-7. Like, are those guys really going to just keep hopping on planes and keep being in hotel rooms for a season that, they're not there for the paychecks, but they probably also knew that their team wasn't really going to compete to begin with. So it'll be fascinating to watch. But yeah. So anyways, well, that'll do it for us tonight. A tough loss for the Dodgers tonight, but there's lots more to go. We got a couple more games against the Padres, then they get a day off. And then Friday night, the Dodgers launch a new series against the San Francisco Giants, and we'll be back. We're going to do a live post-game show, I believe, for that one. So please join us, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Periscope. That'll be a fun one. Always fun when we get to play the Giants. Hopefully it goes better than the last two. Last week we picked the one loss to go live after, and here we are again doing another show after a loss. So maybe we should just keep it a secret when we're planning on doing a live show, and maybe that we won't screw things up for the Dodgers. But as always, we appreciate you guys watching. If you've got questions for us, you want us to answer on the live show, join us on the chat or leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Instagram or any of the places where we are. That's Dodger Blue 1958 on all those places. So we appreciate you joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and go Dodgers.